Good evening and happy Festivus, Rachel.
Thank you very much, Steve. That was excellent use of lizard in a sentence about politics to wind up the year.
It was.
Yes. Well done. Thank you. And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Merry Christmas. Happy December 23rd, whether or not you personally celebrate Christmas, the day before Christmas Eve, which I've always thought of as Christmas Eve. It's always a little bit of a weird day in the news. And if your job is to work in the news, Christmas Eve also tends to be a weird day at work. This year here at the Rachel Maddow Show, we made a deliberate decision to try to mitigate that expected weirdness and awkwardness and the stress and the Christmas blues that can sometimes happen around this time of year. We saw that coming this year, and so we decided we would try to mitigate it by this year on Christmas Eve, today at work, inaugurating our new office dog. His name is Henry. He's 2. He may look like a little guy, but in his mind, he's enormous. That may be because he's from Texas. I should also tell you that his little feet smell like Fritos. We are technically not allowed to have an office dog here at Rockefeller Center, but today it is Christmas Eve, and we're all at work, and so we did it. Sue me. And Henry's presence brought us much joy, much joy, which ended up being handy because today's political news opened with this, which is the new CNN poll in the Republican presidential race. And I know it's just another new poll, but basically, for all intents and purposes, this is the capper for the year. There may or may not be another major poll between now and New Year's Eve, but we now have had, with this one, a long string of polls that look like this. They all back each other up. They all tell us the same story. And so they all tell us basically the story of how this year is coming to an end. However we expected our American politics to go in the year 2015, I don't think anybody expected they would end like this. Since the last Republican debate of the year, there have been 6 Republican national polls. All 6 put Donald Trump in the lead. 5 of the 6 put him well above the 30% threshold in terms of his support, which, when you got a field this large, is a huge proportion of the vote to have locked up. Of the 6 polls, 4 of them put him at or close to the 40% threshold in terms of his support from Republican voters, which is almost impossible to believe. But today's CNN poll has Mr. Trump beating his nearest rival by 21 points. He has a 21-point lead over Ted Cruz. He is more than lapping the second-place contender. If you want a metric to summarize, if you want one metric to summarize the scale of Donald Trump's lead over the rest of the Republican field, this 39% that he's got in the CNN poll that's out today means that Donald Trump has more support than George Pataki, Rick Santorum, Mike Huckabee, John Kasich, Carly Fiorina, Rand Paul, Chris Christie, Jeb Bush, Ben Carson, and Marco Rubio combined with room to spare. And, Ted Cruz may be delighted to be in second place, but he's in second place by a margin of 21 points. Donald Trump is out there all alone. Bloomberg Politics put out a graph that's sort of a poll tracker for 2015 today, lining up Mr. Trump's position in the polls alongside the specific dates of each of these super outrageous things he said on the campaign trail that led to widespread but always false expectations that he would pay some price for those outrageous comments at the polls. And when you look at this year on a line graph like this, you can see just plain as day how Republican voter enthusiasm for Mr. Trump in 2015, it has just broken that mainstream and longstanding political expectation that, yeah, it may be okay to be provocative in American politics, but you can't just be desperately offensive without alienating too many people and it hurting your political standing. That was what we believed before 2015. Donald Trump and the Republican Party base broke that rule this year. I mean, here's where he was in the polls. You see the zoom? Right. Okay, so here's where he was in the polls before he technically announced he was running. He started off at about 4%. Then he announced he was running. And remember, when he announced, that's what, in his announcement speech, that's when he said that Mexican immigrants to this country are rapists. Donald Trump's numbers immediately started shooting through the roof with Republican voters after that announcement. By mid-July, Mr. Trump said that John McCain is not a war hero because he was captured in the Vietnam War. His numbers started going up at an even steeper rate at that point. Mr. Trump got both rude and astonishingly juvenile shortly thereafter when he read out Lindsey Graham's personal cell phone number to a room full of Trump supporters. Republican-based voters just ate that up. His numbers kept going up. He did take a teeny tiny little hitch after he declared war on Fox News, in part by speculating on the menstrual cycle of one of their primetime anchors. That was literally just a hiccup for him, though, before his numbers started heading back up. And from September through November, basically, his poll numbers actually looked a little bit normal, in the sense that they looked like the normal pseudo-EKG pattern of a normal candidate who goes up and down depending on what's going on in the race. Although it should be noted that even during that period, his overall trend was still upward. If you want dramatic action, it turns out the next time he takes off like a rocket is after he calls for a complete ban on Muslims entering the United States. Pew! He goes through the roof. And now he appears to be an untouchable, prohibitive frontrunner in the race for the Republican nomination for president. And none of these newest polls, the polls taken since the last debate, none of them fully reflect the impact of his latest over-the-line, do not just cross the Rubicon, but nuke the Rubicon, deliberate causing of offense, which he did this week in Grand Rapids, Michigan. But we have seen how Republican base voters have responded in 2015 to his previous provocations. And therefore, we have new expectations that we have grown as a nation this year because of him. And with those new expectations we have been forced to grow, we can guess now what the next round of polls is going to show about Republican voters' reaction to this.
Where did Hillary go? I know where she went. It's disgusting. I don't want to talk about it. She was favored to win, and she got schlonged. She lost. And they said, you know, he's killed reporters. And I don't like that. By the way, I hate some of these people, but I'd never kill them.
The newest polling on the Republican presidential race, as I said, does not yet reflect Republican voters' reaction to these latest comments from Mr. Trump. If this year was like any normal year in history, you would expect a performance like that from a presidential frontrunner to hurt his standing in the polls. You would expect his numbers to go down. But this year is not a normal year. And this year, what we have learned in watching the Republican Party react to this candidacy, this year what we have learned to expect is that these most recent comments this week will probably push his numbers even higher. Hi, Henry. Hi. Hi, sweetheart. Hi. It can, hi, Ron. It can be a comfort to have an adorable little, sweet-smelling doggy around when otherwise the world does not make sense, right?
He's very excited to see you.
He is, too excited? It's nice to see you, Henry. You've made me feel better all day. It is nice to have a dog around when it turns out that the rules don't make sense anymore, when deliberately defending huge swaths of the population and being crude to the point where other people are afraid to quote you, when that helps you run for president, it is nice to have a four-legged friend who doesn't really have words, right? He doesn't really speak English. He does know a few commands, and I mean a few, but he doesn't know. It's also helpful, though, to have somebody who does use words and who can explain, and in fact is trying to do a deep explanation of what's going on now in his new book. Joining us now is E.J. Dionne, political columnist for The Washington Post and author of the upcoming book, Why the Right Went Wrong: Conservatism from Goldwater to the Tea Party and Beyond. E.J., I want to thank you for joining us. I want to apologize for not getting you your own Dachshund for this segment.
Well, I almost brought in our dog, Casey. I sent in a picture, actually, of Casey to your office. She's a beautiful dog, but she isn't as well behaved as that little guy.
Having a little dog around just to be distracting and to be apolitical and to be a happy thing in the face of unhappy news turns out is a very comforting, therapeutic thing.
And Merry Christmas Eve to you.
Yes, thank you. Exactly. EJ, let me just ask you, you've been doing all this work on basically the history of conservatism, the history of the Republican Party. Are there historical parallels for the kind of support we see for Mr. Trump, where his support goes up the more he pushes the envelope, the more he not only defies political norms, but really offends people?
I don't think there are any precedents for anything quite like Trump. I mean, you did have George Wallace, who said outrageous things, but he never hit this kind of level of support. Briefly, oddly, in Democratic primaries in 1972. But I think that, to try to figure out why has Trump done this, we have to ask ourselves, why did we all miss this? Everybody said, oh, he's gone by Labor Day. Wrong. Gone by Thanksgiving. Wrong. What did we miss? I think there are several things. One is Trump has been working these conservative networks for years. He's been working a right-wing conservative radio. He was the birther-in-chief. He never gave up on that, even when the president put out his birth certificate. He is well-liked in that part of the party. Secondly, everybody thinks they know Trump. He's been with us forever. He had his TV show. He's had this TV presence. You read the tabloids. I mean, you know, in a sense, Trump built this, to use the phrase Republicans liked. And one of the things I talk about in the book is that there are a lot of angry working class Republicans, white working class Republicans, who have voted Republican year after year, and they don't really have anything to show for it. And Trump turns out to be a perfect way to express their anger. And he's not a Wall Street Journal editorial page or Club for Growth Republican. Right. He attacks trade treaties. He says he's going to protect Medicare and Social Security. He attacks big donors. So he has really put together this interesting right-wing populist thing. And it looks now that it's pretty durable.
Because it is starting to look like he is likely to be the nominee, and obviously they haven't even voted in Iowa yet, but his lead looks prohibitive. Nobody else has been this far ahead at this point in the Republican race and then not gone on to win the nomination, at least not in modern times. Now that it looks like he might win, is there any way to, I think, extrapolate sort of from history in terms of ways that Democrats might run against him, ways that Democrats might recognize what you're describing there as the legitimate grievances driving interest in him on the right and sort of head him off at the pass in the general?
Well, I think there are two things here. One is, if Trump is the Republican nominee and Hillary Clinton is the Democratic nominee, she becomes a candidate of the upper middle class. The whole class relationship that we have traditionally associated with politics, you know, blue-collar folks who are New Deal Democrats, this is going to be flipped on its head. And I think all kinds of suburban areas would go to Clinton. But I also think that Democrats should sort of be a little bit not only concerned, but a little ashamed of themselves, because a lot of these voters, people who are hurting in this economy, people whose wages have gone down, who lost well-paying jobs, those are the people Democrats are supposed to talk to. And Bernie Sanders has talked about that very explicitly. Hillary Clinton has talked about it a little bit. But I think Democrats really have to figure out how to talk to these people, even though they can probably win the election just with those middle and upper middle class votes.
E.J. Dionne, columnist for The Washington Post. E.J., thank you for being with us on Christmas Eve. It's great to have you here, and congratulations on the book.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. I got to say, in addition to that one political science rule about offending people not being a good way to help your poll numbers, in addition to that rule being completely rewritten this year in 2015, the other political science thing that stopped making sense in 2015 is something that we thought was a hard and fast rule in American politics concerning money, spending, specifically ad spending. Last night, we got the summary numbers, basically, for political ad spending in 2015. And what they showed is that this year, for whatever reason, ads basically don't work. Spending lots of money on ads doesn't seem to have an effect on the polls. Donald Trump has spent less ad money than any other significant candidate. He spent, I think, $0 on TV ads specifically. In contrast, Jeb Bush has spent more than $35 million. He's spent what the entire Republican field had spent combined by this point in the race in the last presidential election cycle. For his troubles, he's 3% in the polls. He's losing to Chris Christie. He's losing to Rand Paul in the latest CNN poll. So for whatever reason, ads are not working this year. At least they're not working in that top-level calculation of spend money on ads, see poll numbers go up. Usually that's the way it works. This year, it doesn't work anymore, which is fascinating. But it has led to a really interesting byproduct of the presidential race this year, which is that nobody's talking about the ads. Have you noticed that this year? Used to be when we covered presidential election years, we talked about what ads are running, what effect they're going to. No attention to the ads this year because top line level, we can tell they're not working. That, however, does not change the fact that this year has been a really good year for political ads. I mean, not, I guess, at their effectiveness in moving the needle, but in terms of there just being some really, really good ads, better than almost any other political cycle in recent memory, this has been a great year. And it has this weird other factor this year, which is that even the great ads have been mostly invisible. People haven't seen them. And the good ads are from both parties. I personally think it's a very close call, very hard decision between two specific ads this year as to which one is the best ad that has been run in the country this year. And I think both of them are contenders for one of the best political ads in my lifetime. We've got two ads. One of them is Democratic. One of them is Republican. They are both awesome. The art of making ads about Donald Trump itself has become an interesting ad-making genre that has led to some good results. The main Democratic candidates, Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, have had this interesting challenge because each of them has basically been running eye-catching ads that are not mean about each other. It's hard to be good. It's hard to do great, memorable ads that are positive ads, but we are seeing that this year. Honestly, there has just been some amazing political ad-making this year that nobody has seen. And I don't know if that means they're going to go down to the memory hole. Nobody's going to know this happened this year, but you should see some of these. Particularly these two, this Democratic one and this Republican one, that I think are in contenders for among the greatest political ads in a very, very long time. Hold on.